So this is a gentleman who won a BAFTA for Almost Famous, and he was nominated for Academy Award for The Last Samurai, Independence Day. His father is the great Haskell Wexler, and a good friend of my dad's, and just a really, really good guy. So I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Wexler.
So it was great to see the shots of Manfred. I'm not going to take a long time to talk about history, although I love to talk about history, because if you look up really old sound mixers who love to talk about the good old days, there's my picture. I'm also not going to spend a lot of time talking about my days as a boom operator, because there actually weren't any days. There was like one day. This might have been it. Actually, there was one day where I boomed for Bruce Bazance, and it was one of the worst days of my life. So I decided early on to just say I'm a sound mixer. I skipped the whole utility booming part, but this was a commercial. Everyone always asks whether I'm trying to mic that person back there on the phone, and no, I'm not. There's someone that's coming up to the microphone, but this is also the closest I ever got to doing bag work, because as you can see, the recorder's actually down here, sitting on the floor, because I didn't even have a bag. I mean, we didn't do bag work. We did over-the-shoulder work, which was the Nagra over the shoulder. And then we would boom or use a directional microphone. But this is the one and only picture of me booming. But one of the things I wanted to point out is that when I started out, or actually prior to, I would say probably 1965, sound mixers didn't own their own equipment. I mean, you didn't ever have to go out and buy stuff. There were a few sound people, primarily working in documentaries, that did purchase Nagras in the early days. But the thing that really started our fascination and reliance on equipment and the companies that build it and design it, service it, and the dealers that we have that we love, was really when the Nagra came into its own, because then it was feasible to own your sound equipment. My first sound package was a Nagra 4 and a 415 and an 815. My entire sound package fit in 3 cases. And we didn't have a lot of dealers or companies or anything that we had to really deal with, because so many decisions were already made for us, like in terms of the recorder. If you were doing sound for picture, it was going to be a Nagra. You didn't have to think about whether I want a 633 or I want to go Zaxcom or whatever, because if you weren't using a Nagra, and when I started out, I did one job with the Nagra 3, but very quickly I went to the Nagra 4, which was their new model. But because a lot of the equipment that we used was originated in other countries, stuff would come in that really didn't fit into our way of working or the way we thought we were supposed to be working. For example, I don't know if you know, but the Nagra 3 had one mic input, and it was a male XLR connector, because that's the way they did it, you know. So that whole convention of the sex of the connector and the signal and the direction of the pins are pointing and all. So early on, there was just a handful of people that were very, very helpful, like at Ryder Sound, Ron Cogswell Sr. Manfred was incredibly helpful when we had to figure out what to do with this male connector, you know. So we'd make changes to that. There was no headphone jack. There were banana plugs, because if you bought the DT48s, and if you bought them from Germany, they would come with banana plugs on them, you know, not the typical, you know, 1/4-inch connector that we know now. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we really have it good these days, with so so many companies and so many people that are spending, you know, all of their time thinking about what we need. And if you come to them with things that you want to do or you want to modify something, but we're so fortunate that so many of the things that we use these days, you don't have to modify things, because we're dealing with companies that are headed up by real people that we know and can deal with, and they get it right for the most part, right out of the box. You're not dealing with huge companies that are not responsive to the things that we need. I will say one thing about the birth of the fishpole, because that also relates to early work before the independent filmmaking really came in. All the equipment was studio equipment. Almost all the boom work was Fisher booms. There would be occasionally times when you'd be on location working some job where you really needed a fishpole, and I do have some pictures, but I don't know if we can even find them, because I unfortunately didn't do my part to organize my stuff for this presentation. I'm sorry. All the fishpoles were like painter's poles, you know, or any kind of extending pole. And this pole here, actually, this is not a fishpole. That's actually one leg of a three-legged still camera tripod. I just pulled off two of the legs and adapted it to. Now this is two sound guys. I don't know who they are, but this was in 1959, and they're using what looks pretty much like a painter's pole. And you can see the camera car here, which looks like a pickup truck with some speed rail. So we didn't really have to worry about fish poles that much, but my first experience with a professional fish pole was done by a guy named Les Draver, who later went on to found a company called Lightwave. And he took painter's poles and took them all apart and put a fixed connector on it so that you could use the pigtail. We always had to use pigtails from our XLR connections to the microphones, because all the microphones had Tuchel connectors on them, which, you know, most people probably in this room, I mean, a few of us know what Tuchel connectors are, but you couldn't plug directly into the microphone. You always had to use an adapter cable. So even the painter's poles and things like that, if we put a standard cable, an XLR cable, when it came up and you had to plug into the microphone, you always had to have an adapter to go into that. So Les designed a fish pole where that whole adapter thing worked much nicer, and then he anodized them and, you know, charged about 4 times more than the painter's pole cost, because, hey, it's for motion pictures. It also was at the time at which, I'm guessing probably about 1980 something was when we stopped carrying the Fisher boom on location. I mean, prior to that, Don Sufal, my boom operator, and we'd carry a Fisher boom on every show. We'd use it inside, we'd use it outside, but as more and more things were being shot in practical locations, more and more production designers didn't know that when you build a set, you don't build it exactly the size it's supposed to be with no wild walls. So it got more and more difficult to use the Fisher, and, you know, fortunately we see the Fisher coming back into usage more than we have over many years. But I don't know what else. I mean, there's a lot of other pictures I could show you or things, but I just wanted to make the point that we're in really good shape these days with you know, companies like K-Tek, and the fact that we have such a connection with the people that are actually making the products that we use.